Hi guys, it's Omer from MMOs.com. I'm doing the quick weekly news recap of all major MMO news and announcements for the week ending March 6, 2017. This is episode number 85 of the recap, and the first bit of news this week comes from Revelation Online, and the news is that they officially launched into open beta today, meaning anyone can now download and play the game. If you're unsure about it, check out our Friday Grindfest video, but given that it's one of the biggest launches of the year, I think it's well worth checking out. It is a bit odd though that some of the game is still not fully translated, but most of it is. It's also worth mentioning it is incredibly popular. Even in Founders Beta, it was incredibly packed, so expect the game to be unbelievably packed today. Up next, some interesting data from CCP regarding EVE Online. The Epic Space MMORPG had a remarkable 2016, with company-wide revenues increasing 30% from $65 million to $85 million, and EVE-specific daily active users doubling. In fact, the game is making more money today than it ever did before. An increase in player base shouldn't be too surprising, as they did introduce a free-to-play option in November, but that's not the only reason for the game's surge in 2016. CCP's CEO attributed the massive growth to the introduction of skill trading and the release of citadels. One of the amazing statistics disclosed by CCP is that despite adding a free option, the average revenue per user actually increased by 20%. And despite being a 13-year-old game, EVE Online had an amazing year of growth, and I suspect its future remains bright. Moving right along, Shroud of the Avatar, the upcoming early access sandbox MMORPG by Richard Garriott, is free to play until March 9th. Free to play access to the game is restrictive, but will give players a glimpse of what Shroud of the Avatar is all about. And while the game is still far from complete and received mixed reviews on Steam, I'll probably end up checking it out since I played a ton of Ultima Online back in the day, and both games are made by Richard Garriott. For those curious, the average concurrent user base on Shroud of the Avatar on Steam over the last 30 days has been about 160, which is definitely not great, but it's not awful either. And of course, keep in mind the game is in early access, so there's a lot not done yet. Up next is a rumor floating around that I first saw reported on Steparu that Lost Ark Closed Beta 2 may be starting this summer. It's big news mainly because it's Lost Ark, and Lost Ark is one of the most highly anticipated MMORPGs on our radars. Unfortunately though, it's only a rumor at the moment that traces back to a forum post claiming that a Smilegate employee said that the game will begin CBT2 sometime in June/July. Given that the first closed beta took place last summer, I don't be too surprised if the second round of beta testing comes out this summer as well. And any sign of progress is definitely good, but even if this does happen, it'll be a South Korea exclusive, and there's no word on open beta just yet either. But if it does happen, it shows the game is making progress, and I am eager to play it, but I'll have to keep waiting. Up next, a bit of industry news from Nexon, which made a strategic investment last week by purchasing a stake in IMC Games, the developer of Tree of Savior, which means Nexon actually owns a piece of the developer now. I think this is great news for Tree of Savior fans, as it does show that Nexon is optimistic about the game's future to the point where they're actually willing to put their own money on the line. I also suspect the investment was made because Nexon is super optimistic about Tree of Savior mobile remake. And while most certainly not the main reason, it's also worth mentioning IMC Games also owns and develops Granada Espada. But yeah, this is ultimately good news for the game, as the developer now has more money to play with and hopefully keep updating their content. Next up, another week goes by and another developer embraces free-to-play. This time it's Behavior Interactive, the studio behind Warhammer 40,000 Eternal Crusade, which will transition to a free-to-play game over the next few weeks, with the base game going free with slower progression and limitation on what classes can be played. What can I say? I've been a big believer in free-to-play for years now, and I suspect this change will boost the game's numbers, but we'll have to wait and see just what kind of boost Eternal Crusade will get from this change when it actually happens in a few weeks. Personally, I will check the game out now that it's free to play, and it's probably something I would not have done otherwise. And moving right along, Fortnite, remember that game? Well, it still exists and should be releasing into open beta sometime this year. It was announced way back in 2011 and was originally scheduled to release in 2015, but that clearly didn't happen. The game is set to follow the same release principles as Paragon, meaning it'll be in some free-to-play testing period / open beta for quite some time before they actually launch the full release. And in case you haven't heard of Fortnite, it's supposed to be a mix of Team Fortress 2, Tower Defense, and Minecraft. Expect to hear more about Fortnite later this year. Up next, Inmass is releasing a new class in Tera, and since the name of the class doesn't translate too well from the Korean version, they let players name it themselves by voting on one of 5 possible names, which were Glaive Dancer, Moon Dancer, Paragon, Sentinel, and Valkyrie. Voting officially ended on Sunday, and the name of the new class is Valkyrie. I actually voted for Moon Dancer, which was second place, and after that, everything else got basically nothing. Moon Dancer and Valkyrie pretty much got all the votes, with Valkyrie winning by just a smidgen. The new class should be rolled out with an update pretty soon, but no word on exactly when just yet. Also in related Tera news, in order to keep the game fresh, InMass is testing out different servers with new rule sets, and those will be separate from the main game, so it'll be a fun thing for players to experiment on. It's also worth mentioning that Tera is still doing quite well on Steam, averaging about 3,000 concurrent users on Steam alone, making it still one of the most played MMORPGs on Steam. And next up, some great news for fans of the Secret World, which will be getting a relaunch sometime in the first half of 2017. The relaunch itself isn't exactly a relaunch, as the game servers won't be going down, but it'll be a massive update / remake of some of the key elements of the game. Most notably, they will be remaking the early experience of the game, as well as revamping the combat to be more streamlined and fun. They'll also be changing the business model a bit, making all the story content accessible for free. So Funcom is definitely giving some love to the Secret World thanks to the success of Conan Exiles. All that Conan Exiles money is going to be plowed back into some of their other games. In fact, Funcom said that they'll be launching 2 new games every single year, with 2 games already in early production, and one of those games will be based on the Conan the Barbarian franchise. But more news on that later. I expect that the changes to the Secret World should bring in more players. Next up, Kingdom of the Fire 2 is moving along quite nicely, with the Chinese version of the game launching into a no-wipe closed beta this last week, which is essentially an early access into the open beta, or founders beta, whatever you want to call it. Now, this is a game that's been in development for a long time, and after its Chinese launch, it'll be launching in Russia, and then afterwards, it'll be launching in the West, in North America, and Europe. And it's good to see this one making progress so quickly since we last covered it a couple of weeks ago, and this is a big game. Their CEO said they spent over $60 million developing it so far, making it the most expensive South Korean MMORPG ever developed. So I'm definitely looking forward to trying this one out. Up next, Aion's 5.3 update is right around the corner and set to launch on March 8th, which is on this Wednesday. 2 new queues are being added to the game, the first of which is called Dreadigan Defense, and it features 384 players going up against a massive Dreadigan invasion to protect their faction's capital, while the other one is called Arena of Tenacity, and it features 32 players kind of battling it out in a 1v1 single elimination arena style tournament. It's yet another big update for a game that's still going fairly strong. Moving right along, Netmarble announced that Lineage 2 Revolution is launching globally this year, and it's big news, namely because of how insanely popular and successful the game has already been. Since launching in South Korea back in December, the game earned over $41 million in 2 weeks, with about 500,000 concurrent users. And remember how we talked about EVE Online having the best year it's ever had, and they made like $80 million? That was over a year. Lineage 2 Revolution made $41 million in 2 weeks. That is just absolutely insane. And I do think this one has a lot of potential in the West. It is a large, persistent open world, and I did do a video for it, so do check that one out. But the success of Lineage 2 Revolution shows we'll be getting a lot more mobile and more RPGs. If a game can make this much money in 2 weeks, 41 million, we'll be seeing a lot more mobile and more RPGs in the near future. Next up, a small bit of news for Cloud Pirates. The game launched in early access on MMOs.com a couple of weeks ago, but now it officially launched on Steam Early Access as well. It still costs $10 if you want to play it on Steam Early Access. However, the game itself will be free to play when it actually launches. The game is averaging about 60 to 80 players online at any given time on Steam alone, and I'm sure there's plenty more people playing on the MMOs.com launcher. No word just yet on exactly when it'll go free to play and when it's going to fully launch though. Up next, a bit of news from Tryon Worlds regarding Trove. The game's console versions are officially launching on March 14th, and they've already reached 3 million players, about 1.5 million for Xbox One and PS4. So it's odd to talk about numbers for the games when they're launching in the future, but the way it works is they've been in open beta for some time now already, and March 14th is just the official launch date. And anyone that plays the game's open beta will get a free rare mount in-game as well. And this just kind of shows us how massive these MMORPGs will be on console. Free-to-play MMORPGs will see a big jump in console. I think we're going to see more and more of these games take advantage of the console audience. And moving right along, a bit of news for AdventureQuest 3D. The game's Ashfall Saga is officially released, and that's the game's latest update. The game has also reached about 1 million players, which is quite impressive for an indie studio. The game launched back in October of 2016 and is available on both PC and mobile devices with cross-platform compatibility, which is quite nice as a lot of games have different servers for different platforms, but it's cross-platform here. Next up, Fable Fortune is set to begin closed beta on Steam relatively soon, and the game itself is fully launching sometime in Q2 of 2017. And relatively soon means this week, so you can start playing it on Steam soon. It should not be surprising to see more card games launching, especially from big studios, because we did talk a couple weeks ago that Hearthstone made like $400 million last year, and Shadowverse took the number 2 spot at about $100 million. So these games are making a ton of money, and you'll be seeing more and more of them. The next and last bit of news is about Ragnarok Journey, and yes, all roads lead back to Ragnarok. Ragnarok Journey is a browser-based game developed by a Chinese studio that's making its way to the West. All we know is it's coming to the West, and we have no release date just yet. I suspect the incredibly popular Chinese mobile Ragnarok game called Ragnarok Online will also make its way to the West, but no word on that one just yet. That's just my speculation. But anyway, guys, that's it for MMO News this week. I'll see you guys tomorrow for the podcast. Later, guys.